The pasta carbonara sat cooling on my dining room table while Dad stood by the window, gesturing at my spare bedrooms like a real estate agent showing a property. Mom scrolled through her phone reviewing moving company quotes. My sister Chelsea sat beside her husband Brad, both of them grinning like they'd won the lottery. I set down my fork carefully and waited. This place is wasted on just you, Dad continued, walking through my 3-bedroom apartment like he owned it. What do you need 3 bedrooms for? You work from home, you're single, no kids. Meanwhile, your mother and I are cramped in that retirement community, and Chelsea and Brad are paying ridiculous rent across town. The spare rooms, Mom added without looking up, are just sitting empty. It's selfish really when family needs space. Chelsea nodded enthusiastically. We calculated it out. Brad and I take the master bedroom, it's bigger anyway and we need the closet space. You can have the smallest bedroom. Mom and Dad get the middle one. We'll share the common areas. Share, I repeated quietly. Obviously we'll need to make some changes, Brad said, already measuring the walls with his eyes. This minimalist thing you have going is depressing. We'll bring some real furniture, some color. Make it feel like a home. Dad turned from the window, his expression magnanimous. We're not trying to impose, sweetie. We're just being practical. You have space you're not using. We're family. Family shares. When are you planning this move? I asked. Tomorrow, Mom said brightly, finally looking up from her phone. I've already booked the movers for 9 a.m. Chelsea and Brad's lease ends this week, so the timing is perfect. Your father and I can be out of the retirement place by month's end. We're month to month anyway. Tomorrow, I echoed. Don't worry about preparing anything, Chelsea said, waving dismissively. We'll handle the logistics. You just need to clear out 2 of the bedrooms tonight. Shouldn't take long, you barely have anything in them anyway. I took a sip of water, considering my response. Through the window behind Dad, I could see the security checkpoint at the building's entrance. The guards he'd walked past without really noticing. Have any of you asked where I live? I said. They looked at each other, confused by the question. What do you mean? Dad asked. You live here. We're sitting in your apartment. But do you know where here is? The specific location, the building, the district. Mom frowned. The Fairmont building, obviously. We've been here a dozen times. The Fairmont Residences, I clarified. On Embassy Row. Specifically, in the international district designated for diplomatic personnel. Silence. So, Brad said uncertainly. It's a nice neighborhood. That's why we want to move in. I pulled out my phone and opened my housing agreement. So this building isn't standard residential property. It's classified as protected diplomatic housing, managed by the International Relations Bureau. Every resident requires security clearance and official authorization. Dad laughed nervously. Sweetie, you're not a diplomat. You work in tech doing whatever it is you do with computers. I'm a senior cybersecurity analyst for the State Department, I said calmly. I've held that position for 6 years. My clearance level is TS/SCI, top secret/sensitive compartmented information. This apartment is provided as part of my government housing package. The laughter died. Government housing? Mom's voice came out weak. Diplomatic housing, I corrected. Reserved for State Department personnel, Foreign Service officers, and approved international staff. This entire building requires security badges for entry. The lobby has armed guards. Every visitor is logged and verified. Chelsea had gone pale. But we've visited before. As my pre-approved guests, I said. Registered 48 hours in advance, background checked and escorted by me at all times. You've never been here alone. You've never had building access. And you've certainly never been authorized to live here. Brad was scrolling through his phone frantically, probably looking up the building's security protocols. His face grew whiter with each search result. This is ridiculous, Dad said, but his voice had lost its confidence. You're saying we can't stay with our own daughter because of some bureaucratic nonsense? I'm saying you can't move into protected diplomatic housing without federal authorization, comprehensive background checks, and security clearance that takes months to obtain, I replied. Even if I wanted you here, which I don't since you didn't ask, you legally cannot reside in this building. Mom set down her phone with shaking hands. You could have mentioned this before we booked movers. You could have asked before booking movers, I countered. You announced you were moving in tomorrow. You measured my walls. You assigned bedrooms. You called my home family property. At no point did you ask if this was even possible. But family, Chelsea started. Family doesn't supersede federal security protocols, I interrupted. This building is protected by the same regulations that cover embassy property. Unauthorized residents aren't just asked to leave, they're arrested for trespassing on secured government property. The apartment suddenly felt very quiet. What happens tomorrow? Mom asked in a small voice. When the movers arrive? They'll be stopped at the outer security perimeter, I said. The building manager will check the authorization list, find no approval for moving additional residents into Unit 7C and deny entry. If they try to proceed anyway, building security will contact federal law enforcement. Brad had found something on his phone. It says here unauthorized entry into diplomatic housing can result in federal charges. Up to 5 years in prison. That seems extreme for family, Dad said weakly. It's not extreme for violating secured federal property, I said. This building houses State Department analysts, Foreign Service officers preparing for overseas assignments, and occasionally foreign diplomats under protection programs. Security isn't a suggestion. It's law. Chelsea was crying now, mascara running. We gave notice on our apartment. We have nowhere to go. You gave notice without confirming you had somewhere to go, I said, not without sympathy but without backing down. That was your choice. We're your parents, Dad said, playing his final card. You'd really let us be homeless rather than help us navigate some red tape? There is no red tape to navigate, I said firmly. You cannot live here. Period. This isn't my personal property that I'm selfishly hoarding. This is government housing with federal security requirements. I don't have the authority to move you in even if I wanted to. Then where are we supposed to go? Mom's voice cracked. Back to your retirement community on month to month, I suggested. Chelsea and Brad can extend their lease or find a new rental. These are the same options you had before you decided my spare rooms were family property. But you have so much space, Chelsea protested. 3 bedrooms for one person. It's not fair. I have 3 bedrooms because my position requires a home office for classified work and a secure storage room for encrypted equipment, I explained. Both are locked rooms you've never seen because they're off-limits to non-cleared personnel. The only spare room is my actual bedroom. My phone buzzed. A text from building security. Miss Chen, we have your family registered for a dinner visit until 8 p.m. Confirming they're departing on schedule. I showed them the message. Security tracks every visitor. Your authorized visit ends in 20 minutes. After that you'll be asked to leave. Asked. Brad said hopefully. Escorted, I corrected. By armed guards if necessary. The next morning at 8:47 a.m., my phone exploded with texts. Dad, the movers showed up anyway. They're saying they can't access the building. Mom, security won't let them in. This is humiliating. There are other residents watching. Chelsea, please come down and tell security it's okay. We have all our stuff in the truck. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched from my 7th floor window as the scene unfolded below. A large moving truck idled outside the security perimeter. My family stood beside it, gesturing frantically at the security checkpoint. 2 armed guards remained unmoved, checking their tablets, shaking their heads. Another text from Chelsea. They're saying we need federal authorization. Natalie, please. Our stuff is in this truck. We're literally homeless. I called building security. This is Natalie Chin, Unit 7C. I understand there's a situation with an unauthorized moving truck. Yes, Ms. Chin. Your family members are insisting they have permission to move into your unit. We've explained the authorization requirements. They're becoming agitated. They have no authorization, I confirmed. They were informed yesterday that this building doesn't permit unauthorized residents. Please proceed with standard protocol. Understood. We'll require them to vacate the premises. I hung up and watched as a 3rd security officer approached my family. The conversation was brief. Dad's gestures became more animated. The security officer spoke into his radio. Within minutes, 2 more guards arrived. The message was clear. Leave now or be removed. The doorbell to my apartment rang suddenly, making me jump. I checked the security monitor. It was Building Management Director Patricia Morrison. I opened the door. Ms. Morrison. Miss Chin, she said professionally, holding a tablet. I apologize for the disturbance this morning. Your family members attempted to gain unauthorized access with a moving vehicle. Security stopped them at the perimeter as protocol requires. I'm aware, I said. They were informed yesterday this building has federal security requirements. They claimed you'd given them permission to move in, Patricia continued. One of them, your father I believe, became verbally aggressive with security staff. He threatened to call his lawyer and accused us of harassment. I closed my eyes briefly. I apologize for his behavior. You're not responsible for their actions, Patricia said firmly. However, I need to file an official incident report. Any attempted breach of diplomatic housing security is logged with the State Department. I need your statement confirming they had no authorization. They had no authorization, I confirmed. They announced yesterday they were moving in today. I explained the security requirements and that it was impossible. They chose not to believe me. Patricia made notes on her tablet. Were you under any duress when they made this announcement? Any coercion or pressure? They assumed I'd comply, I said carefully. They booked movers without my consent, assigned themselves bedrooms in my apartment, and called my home family property. But no direct threats. Understood. More notes. For the record, Ms. Chin, even if you'd wanted to authorize long-term guests, the process requires forms submitted 6 weeks in advance, full background checks and written justification from your department head. The timeline is typically 8 to 12 weeks. Their plan was impossible from the start. I explained that to them. Clearly they didn't listen. Patricia looked up from her tablet. The moving truck has been escorted off the premises. Your family members left in a private vehicle. Building security has flagged their names. Any future visit attempts will require your direct approval and escort from the lobby. That's appropriate, I said. One more thing, Patricia added, her expression softening slightly. I've been managing diplomatic housing for 15 years. Family incidents like this happen more often than you'd think. People assume federal security is negotiable when it comes to family. It's not. You did everything correctly, Ms. Chin. Don't let them make you feel guilty for following protocol. After she left, I returned to the window. The moving truck was gone. My family was gone. The security checkpoint had returned to normal operations. My phone was still buzzing with messages. Chelsea, they made us leave. Our stuff is in the truck. Where are we supposed to go? Dad, this is absurd. We're filing a complaint. You can't treat family this way. Mom, please call us. We need to figure this out. Brad, we're storing everything in a facility. It's costing $400. You owe us. I turned off my phone. 3 days later, I received an email from the State Department's Housing Authority. Subject line: Unauthorized access attempt, security report filed. The email detailed the incident. Family members attempting to move into secured diplomatic housing without clearance, claiming resident permission despite lacking proper authorization. Security had filed an official report. Was I experiencing any coercion or pressure from family members? Did I need additional security measures? I responded, no coercion. Family members made unauthorized plans without my knowledge or consent. Situation has been resolved. No additional security measures needed at this time. The response came within an hour. Understood. Your file has been noted. For future reference, any authorized long-term guests require advance approval as outlined in your housing agreement. Thank you for maintaining security protocols. I sat back in my home office, the room Chelsea had wanted to turn into Brad's gaming space. The room where I conducted classified briefings and managed encrypted State Department communications. The room my family had called wasted space. My phone powered back on, immediately flooding with messages I'd missed over 3 days. 17 texts from Mom. 23 from Chelsea. 9 from Dad. 4 from Brad, each demanding money for various moving-related expenses. I didn't respond to any of them. Instead, I opened my housing agreement and read through the security protocols again. The federal regulations that protected this building. The clearance requirements that made it impossible for unauthorized residents. The legal consequences for attempting to breach diplomatic housing security. Everything was there, clearly documented, legally binding. My family had tried to claim my home as family property. Federal law had other ideas. 2 weeks later, an envelope arrived via building mail system. Inside, a handwritten letter from Dad. Natalie, your mother and I have returned to our retirement apartment. Chelsea and Brad found a new rental, though they're struggling with the increased costs after breaking their previous lease. We're disappointed in how you handled this situation. Family should come first, but you chose government regulations over helping your own parents and sister. We thought we raised you to value family loyalty. Clearly we were wrong. When you're ready to apologize and make this right, we'll be waiting. Dad. I read it once, then fed it through my shredder. No apology would be coming. No guilt would be accepted. They tried to take over my home without asking, ignored federal law when it was explained, and now wanted me to apologize for enforcing boundaries they'd refused to respect. The shredded paper fell into the bin like confetti. Outside my window, the security checkpoint stood guard. Inside my apartment, 3 bedrooms remained exactly as they should be. Mine secured, protected by federal law. My family had called it wasted space. The State Department called it diplomatic housing. I called it home. And the authorization documents, the ones my family had never bothered to obtain, the ones that would have taken 12 weeks minimum to process, the ones that made their move-in tomorrow plan legally impossible from the start. Those documents told the real truth. This wasn't family property. It was protected federal housing. And no amount of entitlement could override that. The security protocols were clear. The legal boundaries were enforced. And my home remained mine. Exactly as it should be.
The call came in just after 7 a.m. while I was reviewing cell response data in my home lab. My hands were gloved deep in pipetting cycles when the screen lit up Dad. I let it ring once more before answering. "Good morning, Izzy," he said, his voice polished and unhurried like he was delivering a quarterly update. "What's going on?" I asked, still focused on the microplate in front of me. "I wanted you to hear it from me directly," he said. "We're transferring the rights to the nanoshield IP to Ariel. She's going to oversee commercial development moving forward." I froze. "You're what it's already in motion," he continued. "She's got a stronger business instinct, and frankly, she stood by me when you were still figuring yourself out. She understands market timing." I slipped off my gloves, trying to keep my voice steady. "That's not your call to make." "Of course it is," he said flatly. "Langston Pharma funded your research. The lab time, the early materials, even your assistants paid for by us. You didn't build this alone, Isadora. It belongs to the company. I own the underlying methodology," I said carefully. "The delivery design, the core mechanism developed independently off company clock." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "You think a few late nights in your garage makes this yours? Come on, don't make this harder than it has to be." I opened my laptop and stared at the digital receipt from the U.S. Patent Office. Filed 3 months ago. Confirmed. Accepted. The filing number etched into my brain like a scar. "I hope Ariel enjoys trying to monetize research she doesn't understand," I said. "Good luck." A pause. He expected panic, rage, maybe tears. Instead, I ended the call and removed the USB key from my drawer. It contained every document, timestamp, lab note, everything Elena and I had prepared for this exact moment. By the time I texted her, he did it, just like we predicted. My hands had stopped shaking. I zipped the files into a folder labeled Langston Breakdown and started backing up everything to cloud storage, because if they thought this was over, they'd misunderstood who I learned resilience from. Before Langston Pharma became a brand, it was a black and white sketch on my parents' kitchen whiteboard. My mother, Dr. Camille Serrano Langston, used to outline molecular pathways while cooking lentil stew, talking through clinical trials like bedtime stories. She wasn't just brilliant, she was deliberate, building a company grounded in data ethics and a relentless belief in doing things right, even when it cost more or took longer. My father, Richard, was the smoother one. He wore the suits, spoke at investor luncheons, made people feel safe handing over their money. But it was always my mother's science that gave the company its soul. After she died, I thought we would carry that legacy forward together. But something in him shifted. The lab lost its heartbeat and the boardroom grew louder. Timelines got tighter. Risk tolerance increased. I thought it was just grief in disguise, but by the second year, we were cutting trials short, reducing transparency in our data. When I spoke up, he said I was being overly academic. Then came Celeste, polished, expensive, all smiles and vague references to streamlining vision. He married her 9 months after meeting her at a conference in Napa. Ariel followed shortly after, fresh from an online MBA program and already rebranding the company's digital presence. I remember walking into a quarterly strategy session and seeing her at the head of the table pitching ideas about AI-driven pharma pipelines she barely understood. I tried to stay focused on the science, on my team, on the work that mattered, but things changed fast. My lab access was restricted for compliance. My name was quietly removed from public-facing projects. Budgets reallocated. When I raised concerns, I was labeled emotional, disruptive, too close to the data. At night, I'd sit in my mother's old lab chair, the only piece of hers I'd kept, and try to remember why I hadn't walked away. Maybe I still believed I could save what she started, but now I understood. This company, our company, had been hijacked, its DNA rewritten. And if they were cutting me out, they were going to learn that I wasn't the one who'd been borrowing credibility all these years. The first time I told Elena what was happening, she didn't say anything right away. Just leaned back in her chair, arms crossed, staring at me through the webcam with the same calculating calm she used back in undergrad when she was dissecting case law while everyone else was cramming for finals. "You've been doing independent trials?" she asked eventually. "Yes. After hours. My equipment. My notes. No Carter funding. I've kept it clean." "Good. Start separating the data streams if you haven't already. You'll need a clean chain of custody for the work you're claiming as your own." I nodded. The methodology for NanoShield was refined in my garage, literally, all under my name. "That's what we're going to file under," she said. "Independent patent. Your name only, and trademark the name before they think to rebrand it." It took weeks to build the file. Every protocol, every time-stamped entry, every line of code from the software I'd written to track delivery behavior. I cataloged it all meticulously. I even brought in a third-party lab to validate the results, just in case they tried to dispute authenticity later. I worked late most nights running simulations on the makeshift bench I'd set up in the garage, my mother's framed degrees hanging above me like quiet encouragement. When exhaustion blurred my vision, I'd scroll through the emails. I wasn't supposed to see Ariel discussing her upcoming innovation announcement, Celeste telling the board I was too emotionally invested to lead commercialization. Elena built the legal scaffolding while I built the science. She looped in a regulatory expert, double-checked IP overlap, and quietly ran conflict checks to make sure no one in her firm had ties to Langston Pharma. She even had me create a digital trail of submission backups, logging every change, every access down to the second. I didn't tell anyone at the company, not my team, not the assistants who still believed in the mission. The fewer people who knew, the better. I smiled through meetings, nodded in strategy calls, and let them think I was folding. But in the background, I was laying every brick of my own foundation. The final confirmation came in a 2:17 a.m. email, USPTO application submitted. Pending review, timestamp logged. I sat back in my chair, stared at the ceiling, and let out the breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for months, because they thought they were slowly erasing me. But I was already writing the next chapter without them. The shareholder meeting was held in Langston Pharma's new glass auditorium, sleek, sterile, and soulless. I sat near the back, uninvited but not turned away, just another familiar face no one had bothered to question. My badge still scanned at the front desk, at least for now. The presentation kicked off with projections and polished slides. Richard stood at the podium, sleeves rolled high like he was still the scrappy founder rather than the man who had just gutted his daughter's credibility behind closed doors. And now he said, turning to beam at the front row, "I'm thrilled to announce the launch of our newest division, Langston Advanced Solutions." There was polite applause. Then a spotlight turned toward the front row where Ariel stood and made her way to the stage. Heading this bold new initiative, he continued, is someone who's already shown tremendous insight and leadership, Ariel Summers. More applause. Louder this time. I watched her take the stage in tailored white lips painted to match the Langston logo. She thanked the board through in a buzzword salad of agile pipelines, adaptive commercialization, and cross-market synergies. Not once did she mention science. Not once did she mention me. I looked at the stage at the chairs behind the podium where past project leads and division heads sat where I used to sit. There was no chair with my name. There wasn't even a pause to acknowledge my work on the very tech Ariel now claimed as a foundation for her vision. I sat through the rest of the meeting without moving. When it ended, people filtered out heads bent over phones congratulating Ariel, shaking Richard's hand. Not one of them looked back. Outside, the air was heavy with June heat. I walked the long way back to the parking lot past the sculpture dedicated to my mother, the founder who built the research wing and whose name had been quietly removed from the website last month. It hit me then in a way it hadn't before. I wasn't being sidelined. I was being replaced, and I wasn't going to ask for a seat again. I'd already started building my own table. The notification came through Elena's secure server at 10:42 a.m., just as I was reviewing early-phase trial results from the polymer variant we'd modified in the garage. The subject line was short initiated transfer attempt flag triggered. I opened the document. My father had officially filed a request to transfer the NanoShield IP from Langston Pharma to Ariel Summers, citing internal strategic realignment. They had no idea the USPTO had already logged my independent filing 3 months earlier, with timestamps, third-party validations, and digital backups from 3 separate locations. The flag was automatic. The moment they submitted a conflict was registered. Elena's message popped up seconds later. They just walked into it. I'm prepping everything. Sit tight. I didn't feel relief or victory, just a calm, cold clarity, the kind that only comes after being underestimated for too long. At noon, I got a call from Langston Pharma's legal department. I didn't answer. Then a message from Ariel, "Can we talk?" There's been some confusion. I let that one sit too. By late afternoon, I was at Elena's office, sitting across from her as she laid out our plan in color-coded folders. She was composed as always, but there was a tightness around her eyes that told me she was already thinking 3 moves ahead. They violated USPTO protocol by attempting to transfer rights they don't legally hold, she said. That automatically puts them under scrutiny. Best case for them, this becomes a public embarrassment. Worst case, they open themselves up to an investigation. They'll go with confusion first, I said, then spin it as miscommunication. They'll say I misunderstood the scope of my contributions. Elena nodded. Which is why your logs matter. Your lab notes the receipts for your personal equipment, the off-site server backups. This isn't just a disagreement, it's theft, and the documentation proves intent. She handed me a clean printout of the original patent application. My name. My methodology. No cosigners. No corporate affiliation. I stared at it for a long moment before slipping it into my bag. That evening, while Langston Pharma tried to figure out why their request was being held in legal review, I returned to the lab and ran the same molecular sequence I'd run 100 times before. Only now it felt different, measured, certain, because they hadn't just triggered a transfer. They'd triggered the case I'd spent a year preparing. They held the press event on a Wednesday morning, streaming it live across Langston Pharma's platforms with a glossy headline, "Revolutionizing Therapeutics, a New Era Begins." I watched from my laptop headphones and seated at the same kitchen table where I first drafted the NanoShield prototype on the back of a napkin. Ariel stepped up to the podium in a pristine white lab coat, still creased from packaging. Her name was embroidered on the chest in a font that matched the new Langston branding soft teal lowercase approachable. Scientific theater dressed in PR. She smiled at the cameras, adjusted the microphone with rehearsed grace, and launched into her speech. Our next-gen delivery system uses targeted receptors to optimize therapeutic entry at the cellular level, improving precision and minimizing collateral impact, she read, stumbling slightly over therapeutic. I recognized every word lifted straight from my grant proposal. My diagrams flashed behind her as she gestured vaguely toward the screen, pretending to explain mechanisms she didn't understand. My father stood beside her, hands folded proudly, calling her a visionary and a leader for the future. I stared at the screen expressionless until Elena's message popped up. "We're filing the cease and desist now." She moved fast. The document was delivered within the hour, complete with my USPTO filing number, dated evidence of independent authorship, and a formal demand for immediate retraction of any claim associating Ariel with the technology's development. The live stream ended without acknowledging the legal notice, but the tone had shifted. Comments were disabled. Questions from journalists were cut short. One biotech reporter tweeted a screenshot of Ariel mispronouncing bioavailability, and it spread faster than anything in the Langston pipeline ever had. I closed my laptop and sat back, letting the quiet settle. They'd built their announcement on stolen language and borrowed authority. I had let them speak uninterrupted not out of fear, but to give them enough rope to hang themselves. Now, with Elena's filing in motion and the public record shifting, I returned to the lab and picked up where I'd left off. Because while they played dress-up in borrowed coats, I still had real work to do. The interview was Elena's idea. I resisted at first. I didn't want to become a headline. I just wanted to protect what I'd built. But she reminded me that silence had already cost too much, so I sat down with the Chronicle, a quiet publication with enough reach and enough integrity to get it right. The journalist Simone asked questions that mattered. She didn't chase scandal. She wanted the full story. And I gave it to her. I talked about my mother, how she believed science wasn't just about innovation, but responsibility. How she built Langston Pharma not to corner markets, but to extend lives. I told Simone about the late nights in the garage, about the trial that failed so badly I almost quit. About the morning I watched a test sample hit a target cell with 98% precision and cried alone in the dark. I didn't mention Ariel by name. I didn't have to. The story ran 2 days later under the headline, "Daughter of Langston Legacy Speaks Out Why Science Needs Boundaries." It was balanced, but it didn't pull punches. It included my patent filing the cease and desist and a brief paragraph about corporate misattribution that everyone knew referred to the press event. That same day, Ariel appeared on a morning news segment, clearly a rushed attempt at damage control. She smiled wide and spoke quickly, name-dropping phrases like nanochannels and adaptive release. But it fell apart the moment the anchor asked her to explain how the delivery system differentiated between healthy and cancerous cells. She blinked, smiled again, then stammered something about customizable programming. The silence that followed said everything. Clips of the exchange hit social media within hours. Side-by-sides comparing her blunder to my interview flooded biotech forums. My inbox filled with messages from former colleagues, independent researchers, even regulators who quietly thanked me for speaking out. Langston Pharma issued a lukewarm statement claiming shared innovation. Elena drafted a response so sharp it left no room for interpretation. That night, I went back into the lab. The reaction rates on Trial 17 looked promising, cleaner than I expected. I noted the results, smiled to myself, and set the next cycle in motion. They had the cameras, the slogans, the spotlight, but I had the science. The FDA announcement hit like a fault line breaking open. What began as a patent dispute triggered a broader review of Langston Pharma's recent submissions. The agency cited irregularities in data reporting and accelerated approval attempts without sufficient clinical justification. Elena forwarded the notice to me the second it went live. I read it twice, then again, letting the weight of it settle. This wasn't just about my work anymore. It was about everything they'd cut corners to chase. Within a week, Langston Pharma's stock dropped nearly 30%. Shareholders demanded answers. Regulatory boards called emergency meetings. On the morning of his resignation, Richard stood at a podium in the same auditorium where Ariel had once claimed my work. His suit hung looser than usual. His eyes looked sunken. "I accept full responsibility," he said, voice subdued, practiced. "It's time for a change in leadership." He didn't mention me, not once. Celeste disappeared from headlines altogether, vanishing into the same shadows she used to control from behind the curtain. Ariel stopped posting. Her carefully curated personal brand fell silent. Investors pulled out of the Advanced Solutions division quietly, like slipping out the back door of a collapsing building. Elena called late that Friday. "USPTO officially confirmed your patent stands. They've closed the case on their side." I didn't say anything for a moment, just stared out the window at the city skyline glowing in the dusk. Somewhere across town, the company that had tried to erase me was crumbling under its own weight. They came at you with everything she said softly, and you didn't just survive it. You buried them with the truth. But it wasn't revenge that filled my chest. It was something steadier, something clean. I walked into my lab, flipped on the overheads, and moved toward the whiteboard where my team had left their notes for Monday. Because while they scrambled to contain the damage, we still had trials to run. She picked a quiet place off the main road tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. I almost didn't go. I told myself it wasn't worth it, but curiosity has a way of tugging at you when the dust finally settles. Ariel was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with a cappuccino she hadn't touched. No designer sunglasses, no blazer, just a plain sweater and a nervous glance that didn't quite meet my eyes. "Thanks for coming," she said, voice small. I nodded, sliding into the seat across from her, but keeping my bag between us like a line neither of us could cross. She exhaled hard. I wanted to say, "I'm sorry." For all of it. She looked older than I remembered, like the weight of everything had finally caught up. "I never understood what you did," she continued. "The science, the process. It always felt like a foreign language. But Dad, he made it sound like I could fix everything by stepping in. Like I could finally matter if I just took control." She wiped at her eyes with the back of her hand. "I didn't want to steal. I just wanted someone to see me the way he saw you." I didn't speak right away. I watched her face waiting for the performance, but it never came. Just quiet regret and a kind of rawness that wasn't polished for PR. "You should have asked questions," I said, instead of pretending to have answers. She nodded. "I know." I took a sip of my coffee, letting the silence settle between us. "Build something real next time," I said. "Something that's yours." She looked down, nodding again slower this time. When I stood to leave, she didn't try to follow. Outside, the air was cool, the street quiet. I pulled out my phone and saw a message from Elena waiting subject line Trial 18. Final results in. The package arrived with no return label, just my name written in clean block letters. Inside was my mother's old research notebook, its leather worn soft with time. I opened it slowly, unsure what I was hoping to find. On the first page in her unmistakable handwriting, she had written, "Never let anyone trademark your fire." I ran my fingers over the words, something settling in my chest that I hadn't realized was still restless. Outside, the sun was rising, casting long golden lines across the floor of the lab we built from scratch. No borrowed funding, no stolen names, just quiet, steady work. My team was already arriving. Voices soft, coffee in hand, laughter echoing from the break room. I slipped the notebook into my drawer, took a breath, and stepped back into the space we were creating. One compound, one test, one purpose at a time. We were halfway through the lemon rosemary chicken when Dad stood up and tapped his wine glass with the back of his fork. The sound rang sharp against the soft hum of conversation, and the table fell silent. Jace looked up, his expression caught somewhere between smug and expectant. To Jace, Dad began lifting his glass for graduating with distinction. We couldn't be prouder. Mom's eyes shimmered with pride, her hand already gripping Jace's forearm, like she was holding on to the last good thing in her life. My brother grinned and raised his glass in return. Then, Dad reached into the inside pocket of his blazer and pulled out a small manila envelope. He handed it to Jace with a wink. Jace opened it, paused, then laughed out loud. "You didn't." "Oh, but we did," Dad said. "It's the deed, the house on Ashwood Lane. It's yours now, son." There was a beat of silence where even the air felt stunned. Then Mom clapped her hands together and let out a soft, breathy, "Oh, Everett," like he'd just proposed to her again. Jace looked at me across the table as if expecting me to say something. Congratulate him. Cheer. I swallowed a chunk of dry resentment and forced a smile. "That's amazing, Jace." Dad turned toward me, then still holding his glass, still standing. "As for you, Callista," he said, "rent's due starting next week. $800 a month. You're an adult now." I blinked. My fork slipped from my fingers and hit the plate with a small metallic clang. "What?" He didn't flinch. "You're 22. It's time you start contributing. You want to be treated like an adult, start acting like one. I stared at him. Why do I pay while he gets gifted a house? His eyes never wavered. Because he's worth it. My mother didn't meet my gaze. She was too busy adjusting the cloth napkin in her lap. I looked at Jace again. He had the decency to look uncomfortable, but not enough to say anything. He never said anything. I picked up my fork. Cut the next piece of chicken smaller than necessary. Chewed, swallowed, smiled. The hollow kind of smile you wear when something inside you has just cracked so quietly that no one hears it. Not even you. I kept chewing as if everything was fine. As if the ground beneath me hadn't just given out. I didn't say a word after dinner. I helped Mom clear the dishes like always, stacked them carefully in the sink, scrubbed the pans. No one noticed that I washed the wine glasses slower than usual, or that I dried my hands with the towel clenched so tightly it left marks on my fingers. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it hummed above me, spinning in endless circles like the way I'd been stuck in this house my whole life. And like always, the memories found me when everything else was quiet. I was 14 the first time I realized the rules here didn't apply the same to everyone. Jace had taken Dad's BMW for a joyride with his friends. He was 16 and stupid and showing off, and he clipped the Hendersons' mailbox just 3 blocks from our house. I was in my room that night, headphones on, studying for a biology test. When Dad came home and saw the front of the car dented, he didn't yell at Jace. He walked straight into my room and stood over my desk. "Why didn't you stop him?" he asked, calm but cold. I didn't even know I said. I was studying. You always know what your brother's doing. That was the moment it clicked in this house. If Jace made a mistake, it became my failure too, for not preventing it, not predicting it, not shielding him from the consequences. When Jace went off to college, Mom and Dad paid for everything: tuition, housing, meal plans, even gas money. Meanwhile, I was juggling 2 part-time jobs and online classes, taking night shifts at a bookstore and weekends at a diner because online degrees are more flexible, honey. Flexible meant cheaper. It meant no dorms, no support, no safety net. When I told them I'd started a small jewelry shop online, selling handmade earrings and rings, I was proud. It was the first thing that felt like mine. At dinner, I brought it up casually, hoping maybe, just maybe, they'd ask about it. Dad didn't even look up from his reading glasses. He just smirked. Still playing pretend with beads and craft glue, huh? Then he turned to Jace, who had just gotten a B in macroeconomics, and asked about internships. Mom nodded like it was all perfectly normal. And me, I went back to the sink. Back to pretending I didn't feel like I was constantly being erased, one small insult at a time. These moments, they weren't dramatic. No screaming, no slammed doors. Just 1,000 paper cuts over years. Each one small enough to excuse, small enough to ignore, until they weren't. By the time Jace got the deed to a house and I got a rent bill, the blade had already been buried so deep I didn't even bleed anymore. I just went silent. The kind of silence that comes right before a shift, before a storm, before something breaks. And by the end of that week, I had decided exactly what needed to. The decision came quietly, the way most irreversible ones do. Not with a fight or a slammed door, but in the way I folded my clothes differently that night, rolling them instead of stacking them like I was preparing for movement, not storage. I didn't cry, I didn't rage. I wrote, not a goodbye, a ledger. It started with simple lines. Birthday party, age 10. No guests. I cleaned up alone. Age 14. Took the blame for Jace's wreck. Bought groceries during Mom's illness, no payback. Gave Jace my laptop charger before his finals. Took my exam on 18%. Jewelry business dismissed as pretend. Never asked how much I made. Then it grew. Into categories. Into years. I filled both sides of the paper. Underneath the list, I wrote a number, an estimate of everything I had contributed. Grocery runs. Utility bills. Holiday gifts bought on waitress tips. Small invisible offerings to keep their lives running smoothly. It was more than $9,000. At the bottom, I wrote just one sentence. You won't find me unless I want to be found. I didn't sign it. I didn't need to. I folded it once cleanly and placed it under a magnet on the fridge where Mom always kept the grocery list. right between milk and paper towels. Next came the packing. I gave myself a limit one bag. If it didn't fit, it didn't matter. Jeans, sweatshirts, toothbrush, my laptop, the velvet jewelry box I kept under my bed full of prototypes and orders I never had the nerve to ship. And from the back of my closet, the old floral tin where I had hidden the leather-bound journals Grandma Etta gave me just before she passed. Everyone thought they had been misplaced during the estate cleanout, but she had handed them to me directly wrapped in brown paper. "Read them when you need to remember who you are," she'd said. I hadn't opened them in 2 years. Not since the night after her funeral, when Dad declared all of Grandma's remaining assets were to be handled responsibly, which in his world meant by him. But I had a feeling those journals would matter more now than ever. When I zipped the bag closed, it didn't feel heavy. It felt honest, like everything I was taking belonged to me finally. I slid it under the bed and turned off the light. I still had a few days left to act normal, but I wouldn't be staying long enough to finish the week. The house was still asleep when I slipped out of bed. My phone read 3:58 a.m. I moved slowly, careful not to step on the creaky floorboard near my closet, the one Dad always threatened to fix, but never did. I dressed in the dark jeans hoodie-worn sneakers. Nothing special, just quiet. My bag was ready. It had been ready for 3 days. Downstairs, the kitchen was bathed in the soft glow of the street lamp outside. I stood there for a moment listening. No footsteps, no coughing, no reminders that I was still under their roof. I walked to the fridge and removed the grocery list from under the magnet. In its place, I slid the folded letter the ledger lined with 2 decades of neglect. I didn't add a post-it, didn't underline anything. If they wanted to understand, they'd read it. If not, they'd do what they always did, pretend it never existed. The Greyhound station was 6 blocks away. I walked. Not because I had to, but because I wanted the cold morning air to wake me fully, to remind my body that I was doing something real. Each step away from the house felt lighter, like I was peeling off layers I didn't know I'd been carrying. At the station, I paid in cash. 1 ticket to Willamette Springs. No return. The waiting area was nearly empty, just to me, a sleepy teenager clutching a guitar case, and a woman rocking a toddler who wouldn't settle. I picked a bench near the corner, kept my head down, and breathed through the nerves buzzing beneath my skin. Miss Yara hadn't seen me in years, not since high school. But when I reached out last week, just one message saying, "Can I come?" she'd replied in less than an hour. Always. The bus pulled up at 4:09. I boarded at 4:11. I didn't look back. I already knew what I was leaving. I just didn't know yet what I was going toward. Miss Yara opened the front door before I even knocked. She stood there in pajama pants and a faded college hoodie hair pulled into a high bun, arms folded like she'd been waiting her whole life for me to show up. "You look like someone who hasn't slept in days," she said. "I haven't. Then we'll fix that. But first, get in here." Her house smelled like cinnamon and laundry, warm and worn in. I hadn't realized how much I needed that smell until it wrapped around me. She made tea, the same kind she used to sneak into the guidance office during finals week when I was 17 and spiraling. No questions at first, just warmth and space. But after the tea, I told her everything. From the graduation dinner to the rent demand to the letter I left behind. She didn't interrupt. She just listened, nodding slowly, eyes steady. When I finally stopped talking, I pulled out the journals. They were heavier than I remembered. Grandma Etta gave these to me the year before she died, told me to read them when I was ready. Yara opened one, gently thumbing through the pages with reverence. She was always meticulous, she said. "Look at this, dated entries, categorized notes, bank ledgers, legal correspondence." She paused, finger resting on a paper clipped to one page. "This isn't just journaling," she said. "This is documentation. Look here, this trust fund. She named you the beneficiary. And this was signed the month before your hospitalization." I leaned forward. But I never saw any of that. I never got anything. Yara's expression changed, sharpened. "I think someone may have intercepted it. When you were under medical care, it's possible your father took control of your affairs." The air in my chest stilled. It had always felt like I was dismissed, forgotten. But this was something else entirely. This was theft. Saul Halberg didn't look like the kind of man who took on family fraud cases. He wore hiking boots with his suit and kept granola bars in the side pocket of his briefcase. But when he looked through Grandma Etta's journals, his entire demeanor shifted. Precise, sharp, focused. "This isn't guesswork," he said, laying out the documents across Yara's kitchen table. "These are originals. She named you the beneficiary of the trust in clear binding terms. No ambiguity." He slid one page closer to me. "This is the kicker your father filed for power of attorney just 2 weeks into your hospital stay." I stared at the signature. My name in my own handwriting. Or almost. "It's not mine," I said quietly. "It looks close, but—" "I never signed anything." Saul nodded. "A forgery, most likely. And right here he authorized a transfer from the trust account to a college fund. That fund paid for your brother's tuition." The words landed like a punch. "All of it. Every semester. Room board books. He used your grandmother's money intended for your independence to fund someone else's future." I reached into my bag and pulled out my phone. "I think I have something else." The voicemail had been buried in my inbox for a year, saved out of a strange, unsettled instinct. Jace, drunk and rambling after some party I didn't attend. "Dad says not to tell you. Says the money was better used. But I know it wasn't right, Cal. I know it was yours." Saul listened twice, then pressed pause. "That's not just guilt. That's a recorded admission." I didn't say anything. My mouth was too dry. He leaned back and looked at me, not with pity, but with purpose. "They didn't just take your voice. They left fingerprints all over it." I pressed my palms flat against the table, grounding myself in the solid truth of it all. This wasn't emotional anymore. It was legal, and I was ready to fight. The first notice went out on a Thursday. Saul filed the initial complaint with the county clerk that morning, and by evening, official letters had been delivered to my parents' house via courier. A formal notice of investigation for trust misappropriation, financial fraud, and unauthorized use of power of attorney. By Friday morning, my phone, quiet for days, lit up like a warning flare. Missed calls from numbers I recognized but didn't answer. The diner where I used to waitress. The bookstore manager who had hugged me the day I gave my notice. My old roommate from freshman year, all of them relaying the same message your dad's been calling around, asking where you are. Says it's urgent. Urgent, I thought. Now it's urgent. By Saturday, my mom's Facebook profile was updated with a vague post. "If anyone has heard from Callista, please message me. It's a sensitive family matter. We just want to talk." Underneath, comments piled up, some sympathetic, others nosy. A few old neighbors offered prayers. One asked if I'd run off to get married. I didn't respond. I wasn't interested in putting on a performance for the audience they always seemed to care about more than me. Then came the real rupture. Late Sunday night, Yara knocked on my bedroom door with her phone in hand. "You need to see this." A local news report already circulating online. Prominent businessman's son arrested in DUI incident. The mugshot hit me harder than I expected. Jace, glassy-eyed, hair-messy expression, empty. The report said he had driven through the outdoor seating area of a cafe near campus, knocking over 3 metal tables and a bike rack. No injuries. Charges pending. Public intoxication, destruction of property, and resisting arrest, Yara read aloud. For a moment, all I could do was stare at the screen. The golden boy wasn't golden anymore. I remembered every time I'd heard Mom say Jace is under pressure. Every time Dad excused his mistakes with, "He's just figuring things out." And I remembered every time I had to be the stable one. That stability was gone now, not just mine, theirs. The house I left behind had always looked perfect from the outside. Pressed lawn, coordinated curtains, smiling Christmas cards. But now the cracks were showing, and for the first time I wasn't the one expected to hold it all together. Saul said I didn't need to be there, that we could handle everything through legal channels, but I wanted to look Everett Marin in the eye when his world tilted. We arrived mid-morning. The lawn was uncut. The porch light was still on from the night before. The house felt like it had stopped pretending to be perfect. He answered the door in slacks and a dress shirt but no tie. His sleeves were rolled halfway, like he was halfway to being the man he used to be. He didn't greet us. "You brought a lawyer," he said flatly. "No," I replied. "I brought consequences." We sat in the living room, though I stayed standing. Saul placed the file on the coffee table papers, clipped tabs marked voice recording transcribed and ready. "You know what this is," I said. "Grandma's trust, the forged power of attorney, the tuition money, my signature you faked, my future you redirected." He glanced at the file but didn't open it. "You think this makes you strong?" he asked. "No. Living through it and still being here does." He laughed bitter and small. "You always thought you were so clever. Just like Etta. Always digging, always judging." I felt the heat rise, but I stayed steady. "She believed in me." "You didn't." "She scared the hell out of me," he said suddenly. "Just like you. I couldn't stand how much you reminded me of her." He looked away down at the rug, and for a moment I thought he might say something real. But he didn't. "I want a signed confession," I said, "and a public statement acknowledging what you did to me and to Grandma's estate. That's the only way this ends quietly." His mouth twisted like he was about to argue, but he didn't. He nodded. Once. It was enough. For now. Saul collected the file and I walked out without looking back. It wasn't closure, but it was a crack in the armor, and sometimes that's where the light gets in. 3 weeks after the confrontation, the court ruled in our favor. The trust was restored in full plus damages for the years of misuse. Saul handed me the final paperwork with a quiet nod, like he knew it wasn't about the money. Not really. It was about being believed. Grandma Etta's voice echoed through every line of those journals, organized, sharp, deliberate. She had seen it all coming, and she'd left me the tools to survive it. With the funds, I didn't run off or disappear into some quiet retreat. I sat at Yara's kitchen table and wrote out a proposal for something that felt impossible just a month before. We called it Inheritance Isn't Always Money, a legal aid nonprofit for young adults facing financial abuse, co-founded by the 2 women my father tried hardest to erase. Yara brought heart and vision. I brought structure and fire. We started small, just 1 donated office and a part-time paralegal, but the applications poured in. People who had stories like mine only know Grandma Etta to leave them breadcrumbs. The first donation we ever received came from someone anonymous. Just a note attached. "Your strength gave me mine. Keep going." I read it 3 times and tucked it into the back of Grandma's last journal. She had left me more than money. She left me a mirror, a map, a legacy that didn't live in wealth but in rebuilding what someone tried to destroy. And this time I would make sure no one could take it away again. The folding chairs were full. The room smelled like coffee and hope. I stood at the front of our little workshop holding the last letter Grandma Etta ever wrote to me. Sometimes the ones they overlook are the ones born to build something better. I looked up and saw a young woman in the back row, eyes shining like she'd just heard her own truth for the first time. I smiled, steady and sure. They gave Jace a house, but I built a life no one can evict me from.